Josh met Tim Burton and heard about a possible sequel. And Josh told Winona, and that's when Winona Ryder appeared on Seth Meyers' show and announced that the Beetlejuice, the sequel, was happening.
Okay, I really like Winona Ryder.
Hello, welcome to Queer Cinema Catchup. I'm Joe.
And I'm Allison.
And this is a podcast where we talk about movies, TV, and miscellaneous topics through a queer lens.
That's right. And today we're here to talk about an exciting, festive film to kick off the start of fall, I guess. Mm-hmm. Don't say the name. Joe, don't say the name.
The movie's called Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. For those new to the channel, welcome.
We should probably tell our little backstory then as well. Once upon a time, Joe and I were neighbors growing up who loved to make movies together with Joe's dad's camcorder in the backyard until one day I tragically had to move away. And some might say it's my Lydia Dietz origin story where I became an angsty teen until I finally, 15 years later, got to reunite with Joe as roommates. And we both realized we were queer. We both realized we still love movies. We both still want to make movies. And here we are making a podcast instead.
Why is it movies in the backyard?
Because that's what we did mostly. Well, I suppose it was inside too.
We had nowhere else to go. We had to go to the backyard.
Our parents didn't like movies. Just kidding. Our parents both very much liked movies.
So I think we should just get right into it. We saw Beetlejuice just last night, so it's pretty fresh in our mind. And actually, 2 nights ago, we both rewatched the original Beetlejuice.
That's right.
We'll be going through a combination of the plot, diving into some of the history on Tim Burton and the actors in the movies, and conversations and surprises along the way.
Okay. Let's kind of...
Let's lose the balloon.
It's festive.
Okay.
I mean, later on, we can push him away if he gets a little
Be
mean.
careful. I've had that balloon for 2 years.
Didn't he come like...
With flowers, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make you like him less or more? What is that question?
How special is this? Can this balloon be?
I think it's a present that I've kept it alive for 2 years.
Yes, he's alive. He's not going to die. Don't worry. I'll be careful with him. The original Beetlejuice, I think I saw it once as a kid, and I honestly didn't really remember it. And then the musical, I think, started in DC where I was living, and I heard a lot about it. I heard one of the songs. I was like, wow, this story about grief and spookiness. I can't wait to watch it. And I watched it on a plane, and I didn't really realize it was like a comedy, and it was kind of like, But then we watched it 2 days ago, and I thought it was delightful and subtle in its emotion, but not subtle in its comedy. So I would say I'm a fan of the original Beetlejuice. What about you?
I don't even remember the first time I saw Beetlejuice. It was just something that has existed from my childhood. I couldn't tell you. I probably saw it the first time when I was like 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those movies that is just part of the history of movies for me, like very early on. So I love the movie. I honestly didn't remember too much of the plot though. And then when we rewatched it a few nights ago, I was like doing research on the side, but I kept getting sucked into the story just because I was really enjoying it. And as someone in my 30s now, it was really interesting watching it from that perspective. Whereas I'd always been a child before. I was surprised just how I understood Catherine O'Hara / Delia's character more than I had when I was a child. I was very confused by her character. And so that was really interesting. Yeah. I actually did not understand who she was.
I see. I thought you meant you were like relating to her. I was like, I'm interested. I didn't realize that you related to a yuppie artist. I was like, are you going to start making sculptures?
I could.
I would applaud you.
Hey, I'm at least a curator of sculptures.
You could start.
I have one right there. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I think it really did draw me in. I still feel like I relate most to Lydia or Gina Davis's character in the original than Catherine O'Hara. I did find out that Catherine O'Hara met her husband that she's still married to today on the set of the original Beetlejuice.
Wow.
But the problem was she was already married at the time. But that's okay. Love prevailed.
For some people.
Okay, so then what were your reactions coming out of last night? We saw Beetlejuice at Burbank 16, where we see many movies. What were your thoughts as we were leaving the theater?
I feel like you have a simpler answer than I do.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Had a great time. Had low expectations because I heard some negative criticism going in, and someone told me it was going to be like a cartoon.
Yeah, one of our friends.
And I was like, I don't want to watch a cartoon, but then it was not a cartoon. It was just a little zany.
I listen to the Big Picture podcast a lot, and I reference it a lot. And I actually listened to their episode on Beetlejuice Beetlejuice before I saw the movie. And I just couldn't resist because when I see a new episode comes out, I just have to watch it. So on that podcast, I think they kind of helped set my expectations a bit. They definitely had seen it and had some hesitancy for it, saying that it was a little overstuffed and at times just too much going on. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of warned Allison about it before going into it. And then I think that kind of helped with expectation. And then when I saw the movie, there was definitely a point where I felt a bit exhausted, probably somewhere near the midpoint.
You said something like shocking on the way out of the theater, though. You said, I felt exhausted and done with this movie when he proposed. Did you mean Justin Theroux? When
Justin Theroux proposed, that scene like went on for too long. And that's when I really felt, I was like, okay, I'm beginning to see the cracks of this movie.
That felt like the beginning of the movie to me. So when you said that, I was sort of like, so you didn't like the movie at all?
So my review of it with everyone is like, my complaints were that it was very overstuffed and that I felt some of the performances weren't the strongest. But then as I slept on it, I kind of digested the material more. And even looking back at some of the soundtrack, some of the song choices they chose, it really brought a new depth to this movie. And I texted the entire group that I saw the movie with last night. And I said, after reflection, I give this movie a solid 5 out of 5.
You have no idea how delightful this was for me. Joe is a notorious early riser, and I'm a notorious night owl. And so Joe always wakes up before I do. And so I woke up and as I do, checking my texts from the night, or more from the morning when I'm sleeping, everyone else is awake. And I saw that text from Joe and I was elated. I'm like, he's come around, he's seen the light, or rather the darkness.
I really do love Beetlejuice.
Yeah, I have to say it's original, it's fun. I mean, it's a sequel, but it still feels it's original, especially after all the previews we saw leading up were sequel after sequel of Marvel.
Dark times ahead.
And then there was the Wicked trailer, which...
My favorite trailer of the night, but my least favorite version of the Wicked trailer.
But I just really appreciate it. I knew it was going to be a good audience because...
After every trailer, everyone would be like...
But they didn't. They started it with Wicked, so I was delighted by that, and then I was annoyed. I was like, that Marvel movie does not deserve applause.
Yeah,
sorry.
You're sorry.
I'm sorry for my opinion being harsh, but true.
So it sounds like you're not sorry at all.
And then everyone would applaud as the movie started, and they were kind of doing this tracking shot of the town where the original Beetlejuice was. Well, I don't know if it's the same town, but supposed to be the same town where it was filmed. And people's names were coming up on the screen, and every time someone iconic, their name appeared, everyone applauded. Everyone was a little hesitant, actually, I felt like. Oh, I thought it was just more, it was like a smattering, like certain pockets of people were applauding.
It was a light clap. It's not the whole theater didn't come in and start clapping.
Okay, well, I don't know. I liked the vibes.
All right. Where are we going?
Okay, so let's start at the beginning.
What year?
1988. Which is actually, can you believe the movie came out like 3 years before I was born? I mean, it's kind of shocking to me.
How so?
I don't know. It felt like it was something that came out when I was already alive. Like I thought it came out like when I was a kid, and that's why we watched it. But now it kind of makes sense that I only saw it one time because my parents probably weren't, it wasn't a new movie they were going to go rent for us or take us to. They were like, oh yeah, you want to watch this old movie? Sure.
Yeah. Where they dropped the F-bomb.
In the original?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think it's a kid's movie. It is. But I don't really think that it is.
As an adult watching it in my 30s, I'm like, this is not a kid's movie. But when I watched it as a kid, it was a kid's movie for me. They even made a cartoon out of it, Beetlejuice, that I used to watch all the time.
I don't know. Beetlejuice is gross. He's scary. He's mostly gross. That's probably don't really appreciate.
But it's kind of good lessons for children to learn.
Stay away from gross, scary men.
Yeah, but I mean, it's entertaining. It's ghoulish. It's, to look at the macabre and find the nuance in it.
Agreed. Okay.
Should I read the sequel plot?
Do you want to try and summarize the plot yourself and then read it?
After 36 years, we return to a small town in Connecticut where Lydia Dietz is now the host of a ghost TV show. Mm-hmm. She begins seeing Beetlejuice appearing as a ghostly sprite in reality, and she is terrified and worried that Beetlejuice is returning to her life after not seeing him since they banished him in the first movie.
And I would just add in that her show is filmed in New York City, and they have to go back to Connecticut because of the death of Lydia's father. And they have to pick up her daughter from school, played by Jenna Ortega, who dislikes her mom and her stupid, fake insistence that ghosts are real because she is a woman of science who misses her own father who passed away under strange circumstances many, many years ago. Well, unclear, some time ago.
Meanwhile, Winona's partner, played by Justin Theroux, who seemingly might be a bad actor in her life with seedy intentions, returns with the family to the Deets home in Connecticut.
Yes.
And then it's a combination of bouncing between our world and the afterlife, where Beetlejuice is running some bureaucratic.
He's the same as was before, a bio, what do they call it? A bio
exorcist.
But he has like some minions now who help him.
Willem Dafoe is brought onto the case because Beetlejuice's ex-wife, who was not only dead, but I guess dead. There's more levels of being dead.
I don't think she's dead. She was just cut up into a bunch of pieces, so she couldn't interact until she put her body back together. But her power is that she can suck people's souls and make them dead. And
Willem Dafoe's on the hunt to find Beetlejuice because he believes it will lead to them capturing Monica Bellucci.
A little unclear to me, like Beetlejuice is a bad actor, like he's a bad actor within the underworld, but it seems like William Dafoe's character is actually after the ex-wife. But then as the plot progresses, I guess Beetlejuice breaks some underworld laws as well, and so that gets a little muddied. And as you can see from this description, the overstuffed nature of the story is pretty true. But I feel like in the beginning it was well balanced, where they like set up each element, like, oh, Beetlejuice still wants to go after Winona Ryder. His wife, apparently he was married once before, has put her body back together recently and is trying to go get Beetlejuice because of revenge. And there's like a whole reason why she wants revenge over Beetlejuice. And then you have the family drama, which I felt like I understood each story component, but just as they like kind of move through the movie and tangle these up, it doesn't work as well, and there's a lot of plot holes, but the sequences are very delightful, and so I was able to forgive it.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I was not so forgiveful last night, but then upon sleeping on it, I was forgiveful.
Yeah, you were very. I thought this was gonna be we were gonna fight on this podcast because you were like, that's what you said. You would be turned into Beetlejuice.
It's showtime.
And I guess just to like actually, I didn't even write down the summary of, but I think we captured. Okay, go for it.
Beetlejuice is a 2024 American dark fantasy comedy horror film directed by Tim Burton from a screenplay by the writing team of Alfred Goh and Miles Millar, based on a story by Goh, Millar, and Seth Grahame-Smith, a sequel to Beetlejuice, and the second film of the Beetlejuice franchise. I need to find out more about that. The film stars Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, and Catherine O'Hara, reprising their roles alongside new cast members Justin Theroux, Monica Bellucci, Jenna Ortega, and Willem Dafoe.
What did you need to find more about?
The Beetlejuice franchise. That's a scary term. So as long as there's just two, that's enough for it to be a franchise?
I mean, I have on here the question about a threequel, but we could talk about that now, or we could wait.
Let's wait.
Okay. Do we want to say a few things about the original, just discussing kind of...
Go for it.
The production? There were some differences. The script was supposed to be less of a comedy and a lot darker. The car crash that Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin are in, which is what kills them in the original, was going to be very graphic. Barbara's arm was going to be crushed. The couple was going to be screaming for help as they slowly drowned, which, I do think it's kind of odd that they look so beautiful and youthful while all the people in the underworld in the original the marks of their death are upon them. And it's kind of strange that our main characters like look so nice and normal. Mm-hmm. And then instead of forcing them, the Dietzes and their dinner party guests to dance at dinner, as they very iconically do in the original, they were going to cause a vine pattern carpet to come to life and attack them by tangling them to their chairs. So I think it was going more for scares than for like strange, funny possession, which is a weird, you know, kind of more straightforward in a way and like not as memorable, I would say. And then the character of Beetlejuice was supposed to be a winged demon. And this part kind of raised questions for me. I don't know what I think about this. He was supposed to have taken the form of a short Middle Eastern man. And he wanted to kill the Dietzes rather than scare them. And he wanted to have sex with Lydia rather than marry her, which I mean, I think is the implication underneath the marriage, but makes it more of a kid's movie if you're not focusing on that. Mm-hmm. And then instead of being just summoned by his name, he'd have to be exhumed from his grave, and then he'd be free to wreak havoc. And he could be controlled. He could be summoned, but not controlled by saying his name 3 times after that. And he would just wander the world tormenting different characters in different manifestations. And then in the original ending, I think they conducted the Dietzes and their friend, Otho, was that his name? They were going to perform an exorcism to destroy Beetlejuice and then force Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin to live out their lives as mini versions of themselves in Adam's model of their home. And then there was another version, too, where the parents go back to New York and they leave Lydia with Gina and Alec. And then the ghosts help her turn it into a haunted house, which I kind of like that ending because my favorite part of, or the heart comes from the original of like Gina Davis's relationship with Winona Ryder and the kind of a surrogate mother-daughter bond that they have. So,
which I wonder why she was left out of the sequel.
It's really obvious why, but I also don't understand. I also was kind of confused by that. It's because they're dead and they're supposed to look exactly the same. So they couldn't appear in the new one because they're older. And unlike the other characters, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It's not like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
But I wish they could have at least a brief flash of them or something.
Yeah.
And then this is my favorite fact I learned. Larry Wilson was one of the writers and co-producers, and he sent it in to an executive, and he got a call, and the executive was like, come on in, I want to talk to you about this. And he was like, yes, like they love it, this is going to be great. And then he shows up, and they're like, what are you doing to your career? You could be a tastemaker, you are somebody who has influence, and you're going to totally torpedo your career if you go with this weird shit, basically.
To Tim Burton?
Not to Tim Burton, to Larry Wilson, who is a producer and writer.
Okay.
And I just thought that was quite, it's a win for the weirdos of the world, I guess. Like, hey, weird can work. Mm. Weird is good, instead of it being something bad or unserious, which I think captures the ethos of Beetlejuice. So those are the facts I found out. And did you find out anything interesting?
There are 3 cameos in the movie Beetlejuice.
Really?
Dick Cavett appeared in Beetlejuice as a cameo in a scene where he's playing himself during the dinner scene. And Dick is a former talk show host for the Dick Cavett Show. And the show was most relevant in the 60s through the 70s. I totally saw him like at the dinner party. I was like, why? Like his voice sounds familiar. He looks so familiar. I was like, hey, that's Dick Cavett. So then that led me to look into like who else
was at the table.
Was at the table. Nobody else really stood out to me. But then also, I guess at one point, Robert Goulet, who was a famous singer back in the day, appeared as himself in a television commercial for a haunted house. And then Sylvia Sidney, the caseworker for the recently deceased, was an American actress renowned for her distinctive voice and dramatic presence. She was known for Dead End, which came out in 1937, and Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams, 1973, where she was nominated for an Oscar. And when you see her at the desk, you're like, clearly this woman seems like she
has pizzazz.
She has pizzazz. And so, yeah, she had been around for a while.
Yeah, no, I read that too. And I read that one really endearing thing about it was that she had been so iconic and famous. And then people, as time goes on and life continues, people forgot about her. But her being in this movie kind of brought her back into the zeitgeist. I don't know. I really like that.
That is,
but sadly, I think she was born in like 1910. So she's passed away.
I think she lived
before the new one.
She got on the Soul Train. She's fine. I think it'd be interesting to talk about Tim Burton.
Sure.
For the book Burton on Burton, he said the script had no real story. It didn't make any sense. It was more like a stream of consciousness.
The original script.
And I can see that. I mean, when we were rewatching it, you were saying that there were just so many storylines. And so I agree at the beginning, it seems like that, but then everything ties together quite nicely towards the end.
I think the way it's written, I think it went through a couple rewrites, it seems. I think they set it up so it's like the Catherine O'Hara's character doesn't want to move to the country and she's resentful. I feel like that's well established. Lydia's kind of like a roll your eyes teenager who doesn't respect her stepmother, doesn't really understand her family and isn't understood by her family. That's well set up. We have Gina and Alec who are shocked to discover that they're dead and stuck in the house and have to haunt these people to have any kind of peace and also adjust to being dead. Mm-hmm. And then we have Beetlejuice, who I tracked through the original. You told me a crazy fact. Do you want to repeat what you told me about?
What did I say?
Well, I was tracking like when Beetlejuice was introduced around 11 minutes and like when he kind of came, where you finally understood who he was, which I believe I wrote down. At 36 minutes, approximately, you kind of get an explanation of his bioexorcism. And then when I kind of told you that, you were like, well, you know he's only in the movie for 7 minutes.
Was it 7 minutes or was it 17 minutes?
You know, that is a good question because you said 7 minutes and I believed you. But now in looking back, I do wonder if it was closer to 17.
It may be 17.
But you know, you can do a lot in 7 minutes. In high school, we had one break that was 7 minutes long. You could do everything. You could chat. You could get your books. You could even buy like a chocolate bar if you wanted to.
Chocolate bar?
I never bought a chocolate bar. There were cookies you could buy in the cafeteria, I remember.
There were no chocolate bars?
I mean, there probably was a vending machine. But
why would you bring up chocolate bars?
I was trying to think of something.
You know, the chocolate bars.
You know, I'm kind of removed from my teen years. I was trying to think, what would a teen do? What would a teen do with 7 minutes? Mm-hmm. Clearly, they would get some chocolate.
So then I guess to tie in how long Beetlejuice is in the first Beetlejuice, in Beetlejuice, I was also wondering if he was going to get the same, reserved amount of screen time, but I felt like he got a pretty good amount of screen time, but I'd be curious if it actually didn't add up to how much
you thought
I felt it was.
So I also felt like he got more screen time in the sequel, but then I did find a couple quotes from Tim Burton and from Michael Keaton saying, like, no, to make Beetlejuice the center of this film and to give him more screen time would be a detriment. That's not the point of Beetlejuice. Let me see if I could find the quote. Keaton insisted that Beetlejuice had limited screen time in the film, like in the first movie. I think that was something he wanted or he wasn't going to do it. He said, the idea was, no, you can't load it up with Beetlejuice. That'll kill it. The Beetlejuice character doesn't drive the story as much as he did in the first one. He's more part of the storyline in this one as opposed to the first one, which is a case of this thing comes in and drives the movie a little bit.
I feel like he was really involved in this movie.
Was too. I feel like what was interesting about this one, I mean, I guess this happens in this first one too, but Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin are dead. So then calling upon another dead spirit to help them doesn't feel the same to me as the characters in this movie who are alive. They summon him for help, which even though they hate him and know the danger of him, and that makes him feel more active or more part of the living storyline, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But I kind of like that. The
original Beetlejuice, it always seemed like he was trying to force himself into the narrative, whereas this one, he is necessary and they need him.
Yes.
Which I think was like really interesting. I don't think that's a negative critique
no, me
at all.
neither.
And something that was mentioned on the Big Picture podcast, one of the complaints that Sean had is he was upset how early and unceremoniously Beetlejuice appears.
Huh.
And I too at first was like, Beetlejuice just kind of he's like sitting at his desk, you know what I'm saying, in his office. And it was like done in a very like unglorified way. And I was like, it would have been so much powerful if you like had resisted showing him for longer. Sean was saying that too. Like, wouldn't it have been nice if you really build up the anticipation? And then it's like when he first gets called upon, that's the first time you see him.
That would have been awesome.
And then Amanda on the show was like, well, the movie's called Beetlejuice. You want to wait 49 minutes into the movie to see Beetlejuice? And so I was kind of conflicted on that. And then when I watched the movie, I think one of my complaints after I saw it, I was telling everyone, I was like, yeah, like what, like why present Beetlejuice so unceremoniously? They could have really built up the suspense. But then part of my reflection on sleeping on it and why I'm kind of liking the movie more and more is that Beetlejuice is presented in an unceremonious way, which I think was intentional in this day and age. And when I say day and age, I mean in the last like 10 to 15 years of doing all these like fan service movies where you really draw up and build up the anticipation of this character that we want to see. And then like give it this like crowd roaring, like applause opportunity. I think I feel like Tim Burton intentionally undercut it and just showed Beetlejuice in just kind of this boring light
and this
to make it feel like no time has gone by in a way, and to just make it feel more like they all have been living or existing in this afterlife the entire time, you know? Like there was no like real weight to it. I don't know. I just feel like everyone felt like they'd existed.
Yes, it felt real. Like this was a real update. I suppose that's an interesting way of looking at it because I think my reaction to the original when I watched it for the first time as an adult on that plane ride was Beetlejuice disgusted me. And when I think about the concept of Beetlejuice, like don't say his name 3 times, it sounds like very spooky and dramatic. And then my reaction, like kind of in seeing what Beetlejuice actually was, I was like, oh, ew. And I feel like showing him so quickly like that in such a boring, mundane, gross light just kind of reinforces that this is who that guy is. Like he's not, he's a demon and he's causing trouble, but he's like more of a trickster. He's not like a big bad to fear in that way, more just to kind of be like, oh, that guy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It sounds like we're on the same page
I
about
agree.
it. I do think there was and it's going to tie into, I kind of want to save it to the end of just why I think this movie is so powerful.
Yeah.
Specifically to Tim Burton's
vision,
real life, and just like career in general.
Interesting.
But before I like dive into any of that, another version of this movie is you have the whole attic is rediscovered. Jenna Ortega, her character discovers the like miniature of the town, discovers what Beetlejuice is. Winona's there when her daughter first says the name, and that's when it's like first said out loud in the real world. There could have been a movie where we didn't see any of the afterlife stuff yet, and we would just follow the family, and not until Winona Ryder and Justin Theroux were in the room when Justin summons Beetlejuice. There was a version where they could have waited till then.
Agreed.
Like 49, I don't know why 49, the number 49's in my head, but like I'd imagine it's like 50 minutes into the movie that's the first time you see Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
And then I feel like that would like be drawing up like
anticipation
and suspense. But the choice to not do that, I think, was very much intentional, as we're saying.
Yeah. And one thing I also think that the Big Picture podcast maybe forgot, or maybe they talked about this, but he actually appears before you see him in the underworld or the afterlife. You see him in the first 5 minutes of the movie because Winona Ryder has this talk show where she is honestly, I was sold on this movie in the first 5 minutes because she is like a ghost hunter and she's interviewing this couple, and then they have this footage of her going into their haunted house because they're terrified of this new house they bought that's supposedly haunted, and it's her in a kitchen and all of the plates and stuff are going crazy, the dog's hanging from the fan, and just like focusing in on Winona Ryder. It's like night vision, and she's like, oh, this is dangerous, and being like very kooky. And then they cut back to Winona on the soundstage with the couple and being very like serious, and I'm a ghost hunter, I'm a serious person who's kind of sold out a little bit. And then she looks in the audience and she sees Beetlejuice, and they cut back to her face and she looks again really kooky and crazy. But what I appreciate about that, and what made me feel, I liked the humor of this opening, and I liked the idea that Lydia, this time has gone by, she has leaned into who she was as a teen, but in a way that's not cool, not countercultural, not authentic. It's like I have to sell this part of myself in order to be an adult or whatever, just to be this person. And then yet there's this like haunting image of Beetle. It's funny, but it's like, oh, he's been after me all this time, and I thought I escaped him, but there he is in the audience. And you kind of read that as like a haunting, a psychological haunting, or you can read it as what it actually is, like a literal reappearance of Beetlejuice. But I feel like putting him in the beginning like that made me excited for like where it might go emotionally, and I was pleased by what happened.
But I wouldn't say that was a real introduction to him, because like what you just said, whether you want to believe that it was just because they presented in a way where either Lydia could be imagining this or that could literally be Beetlejuice. I wouldn't say that's his real character introduction. I feel like they're doing a little bit of that suspense and tension building. But then I feel like the real first scene with Beetlejuice is when they show him in the office.
Yeah, I mean,
so unceremonious.
I don't disagree, but it's wrong to say that's the first time you see him. Like, it's not. You see him right away in the first 5 minutes.
As far as a character introduction, though, I feel like it's in his office.
I think his first appearance is tied to Lydia's reaction to him, whether he's real or not, and that's kind of how I think of him. And then we see how scared she is of him, but then the next beat is to undercut that with this, like, here's this guy. who kind of sucks, who's not that scary in his office. So I think what we're saying is the same thing. I just think like you should look at them together and not separate them because he is in the first 5 minutes.
Because you said he has a line that she saw him.
Later on, so then he appears a few other times, like when she's in the real world, and she just reacts every time very hilariously, like by screaming or like freaking out and no one understands why. But and I always thought that was imagined. But then later on, Beetlejuice says something when he's in his office, like, I think she saw me that time. So the implication is that he is really appearing. But
I don't know if I agree with that though, because the whole rules of Beetlejuice is that he has to be called upon. His name has to be said 3 times. How can he like apparatus to a place and then disappear?
I don't know. But he did say it. I remember. But I don't know. I mean, I guess, is it possible that he cannot interact because no one else can see him then? That he can't do anything? But he's just appearing? I don't know. It is weird. And it also was weird that this hadn't been happening to her. Like she says later on, I thought he was gone. He hasn't appeared back in my life since I was 17 years old. And now he's back again. And what does that mean? So, which there still wasn't really, I don't think there was a strong reason why Beetlejuice returned, aside from the fact that her father dies in a hilarious sequence where she goes and meets her stepmom, Delia, who's now I guess she was famous in the first movie, but she now seems to be a very famous and successful artist in Soho, New York, where she has a whole modern art show. And that's when Delia, what does she say to Lydia? It was really funny. Lydia goes, what happened? Are you guys getting a divorce? And then Delia's like, how could you ever say that? No, he died. Yeah.
And then she launches into this story, which then we use Tim Burton's artistry of using like stop motion animation. And it shows the father, how he was in a plane crash. And then Lydia's like, oh my gosh, he died in a plane crash. And Delia's like, no, he didn't die in the car. He survived the crash. And from survivors in the water, it turns out he was afloat. And then Lydia's like, how did he die? And she's like, well, a shark came up and ate him. And then I think that at some point we meet the father who, for the rest of the movie, has his head chopped off for a very specific reason.
What a way to let the character remain as part of the story, but let everyone know what you think about what he's done and make a production out of it.
So it was really genius the way they did it. Basically, the only time his real face was shown was on his tombstone, which took me a second to realize was a shark fin.
Yeah.
And the whole death of the father kind of sets everything into motion, where they all return to Connecticut. And then that's where some of the fanfare happens. We have the funeral happens and they're singing Day-O, which was a
choir of children is singing Day-O.
The Calypso song that was famously lip synced in the first movie. So that was like a very funny callback. And then, I don't know how much we want to get into the plot.
I like the plot.
I feel like there's like 3
threads.
The movie doesn't have enough time to pull them all off successfully, but they do all become intertwined in the end.
Yes. And they lead to like a fun climax. It's just that there are certain kind of inelegant beats, like this whole movie, which I think is actually a very brilliant idea. Jenna Ortega's character, Astrid, the daughter of Lydia, despises her mother, not only because she's kind of this kooky ghost lady, but also because Astrid has lost her father, and Lydia claims that she cannot see her father's ghost. And so this is why Astrid doesn't believe her mother. She thinks it's all a sham. But really, it's kind of also a story about grief, and the disconnect between them is both like a matter of perspective, like ghosts are real, ghosts are not real, but also kind of based on this real emotionally weighty idea, which I thought was really beautiful. But then they spend all this time kind of sketching that out in a way that is working. But then when they're in the underworld later on, it's like she just kind of runs by the dad and he's just there. And I'm like, wow, what a way to really simply and without a lot of emotional weight kind of resolve this storyline. And it just feels kind of random. So there were a lot of beats like that. Or like there's this boy that she starts to like, and it's very obvious he's a ghost who wants her to die so he can come back to life. And it's just, it's not like, there could have been a way where this was plotted out with like a lot of twists and turns, but it just wasn't because there was too much going on.
Yeah. It's been 36 years since the original came out. Tim Burton has had this long spanning film career as a director, and he's coined the whole like Burton-esque imagery and filmmaking, and some of it's transformed. It's gone from like practical effects into more digital CGI effects. I'd say like the last like almost 20 years now. I think he's kind of not lost relevance, but definitely lost the guaranteed
hit.
I mean, I feel like they've been hit. Like Alice in Wonderland is one of Disney's highest grossing movies, but I think they kind of lost that real personal connection that he brought to his earlier works, like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah, to kind of elucidate that for the audience, like for Edward Scissorhands, I was reading today that Tim Burton says that's his most personal film because he feels like as a kid growing up in Burbank, not too far from us, you know, he had a difficulty relating to and communicating with his peers. And so Edward Scissorhands, you know, is kind of an allegory for his own youth. And so I do think there is this personal element to his early work that is effective in spite of it being so fantastical.
And so I have a little bio about Tim Burton that I read from a critical companion to Tim Burton. And it says that born in 1958 in Burbank, Burton was an introverted and quiet child who loved movies and was a big fan of 1950s sci-fi, fantasy, and monster movies. He won a scholarship in 1976 to attend Cal Arts. He was funded for the production of some short films that include Vincent, that came in 1982, which is narrated by Vincent Price, which again has the connection to Edward Scissorhands, which features
It's
Vincent
one of his
Price.
last appearances. And also I read today that Vincent, the short, what's it called? The short film's called Vincent. It's about a little boy that wants to become Vincent Price, which is great.
It's great. It's a 6-minute black and white short narrated by Vincent Price. And then he did a 45-minute live action retelling of the Grimm fairy tale Hansel and Gretel in 1983. And Frankenweenie, 1984, a 28-minute live action short film of a child who reanimates his dead dog by using electricity. Then Burton directed Aladdin and His Wonderful Lamp, an episode of the Showtime TV series Fairy Tale Theater, hosted by Shelley Duvall, who passed away recently. And then he did a remake of The Jar for NBC's 1985 resurrection of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So I've only seen 2 out of the 5 or 6 shorts that I mentioned, which were, I've seen Vincent, and then I've seen Frankenweenie, both the short film and then the eventual stop motion animation film they did later on.
Yeah.
Did you see Frankenweenie? Either versions?
No.
I forget why I saw it, but I must have been on some like special extras for a DVD. But yeah, I mean, Tim Burton, he's considered one of the most popular and renowned artists of the present age, I would say. Would you agree?
I think he was, and he certainly has a very specific, probably one of the more specific aesthetics and artistic visions. So in that sense, yes, but I don't know if I would say, what was the phrase you used?
To be considered one of the most popular and renowned artists of the present age.
I don't know if that would still be considered to be true. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess maybe in the last 10 years, it's no longer as true. I think this book was written in like 2016, which is like
Almost 10 years ago.
almost 10 years ago. Sleepy Hollow is also part of his filmography. Sweeney Todd is part of his filmography.
Sweeney Todd.
I mean, I don't really like Alice in Wonderland, but it was still a
I haven't
financial
seen
success. Dark Shadows was horrible. I don't know if that made any money. And then he did Big Eyes, which was more recent within the last, I think, 10
liked
years
that
ago.
movie.
I never saw that movie.
That was pretty good. Also, just a story I didn't know, and it was true. So I always appreciate when
That's interesting.
I learned something true. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good question. I think, you know, we're kind of in a weird time where a lot of big auteurs are older, and there haven't been many to kind of swoop in underneath because of the state of movies. Would you agree with that? And so there are these cultural touchstones like Tim Burton who are still around, still making art. And I think Beetlejuice proves he's still someone who has the ability to create something great. But, you know, I feel like, can we say they're so tied to the culture? Like, and that kind of goes to the question of, is film even what is defining and driving the culture? Probably, sadly, not as much as we love it. And so I don't know how to answer that question, but it's a good question that you pose. It's like, it's very thought provoking.
And then on the Big Picture podcast, they were talking to, it was a guest on the pod. I forget his name, but he was mentioning that when he watched Beetlejuice as a kid, when he watched Edward Scissorhands as a kid, when he was watching Tim Burton movies as a kid, he couldn't quite articulate that this is an auteur filmmaker. But I think what's really interesting about Tim Burton is, even in my mind, again, people who are new to the pod, Allison and I were both very inspired by M. Night Shyamalan, who I would also say is an auteur filmmaker, but we didn't quite have we were very young. We didn't have like the language for film or anything like that. But I think you and I both clocked when we watched an M. Night Shyamalan movie, there was something there where we were like, this feels like he made it. It felt specific. And so on the Big Picture podcast, this guy was talking about how that's kind of what Tim Burton was he's like, I wasn't aware of what an auteur filmmaker was, but I know if I'm going to see, I know that I kind of have an idea of the filmmakers behind the camera, you know?
Yeah, there's a voice.
There's a voice to it.
Or a lens, or there's so many words you could use.
Yeah.
But it is interesting for me because I am like someone who approaches things from story or like from a writer's perspective. And so Tim Burton does not write his films. Is that right? Or does he ever?
I don't think he does. I don't know.
So that is interesting to me because, I mean, they are all clearly Tim Burton films, but I do feel like story matters so much. And I feel like some of his most successful ones, like Edward Scissorhands, A Nightmare Before Christmas.
Which he did not direct.
He did not. He just produced it. Oh, interesting.
It's called Tim Burton's A Nightmare Before Christmas, which again goes to the power of the Tim Burton look. And so, yes, I don't feel like Tim Burton is in the last 10 years as relevant. I still think that
yeah, for sure.
You could make a Tim Burton style movie, like the movie Coraline, for example. I guess like the stop motion connection to it too, but it's like a movie like Coraline comes out, which I'm pretty sure Tim Burton was not involved in.
But it
has like Burton-esque qualities to it.
I agree.
And so it's like, yeah, I think he is one of those, I don't know.
Tastemakers.
Yeah. Alfred Hitchcock hasn't been alive for so long, but I still can watch things and be like, oh, that kind of has like a Hitchcockian feel to it.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So while they're not,
yeah,
maybe not making hits, there's still like a look and quality that I connect to.
I was sitting here actually wondering if I was like, Coraline, is that a Tim Burton film? Coraline, is that a Tim Burton film? And then I
don't think it is. Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. But yeah, to me, it is interesting because film is such a director's medium, but I always as a writer, I always kind of, in my mind, I'm a little contrarian about that privately because I kind of feel like it's interesting that as a culture, we've chosen to kind of champion the director who, yes, gets to put their final stamp of approval on everything, which I suppose is the most important factor. But I don't know. I just feel like I'm just a story person. Like I think the story is what matters most of all, in my opinion, no matter what. And like aesthetic or vision elevates it even further. But if the story isn't good, I just don't have any interest usually. And so, I just come at it from a writer's point of view. But
that's a tough question to pose because I don't want to have to choose which one. And I truly believe you can't have one without the other. Like you could have a really incredible story get absolutely squandered if you have the wrong team around it. And I feel like the director who is able to make a lot of movies kind of continues to bring on the same team with them every time and kind of like curates who they want to work with.
That's true.
Even like the actors bring things to it too and are able to like emote, there's like so many, like that's why like we're not just reading scripts, like we're not going to a movie theater and like sitting down with like a sheet of paper and like reading it. But then if you don't have like, I feel like the foundation of a movie is the story. And then, so yeah, again, it's like, you can't have one without the other, I'd say.
I think that's true. I just think, I guess if you were to ask me, would I rather see a movie with a good story that looks bland or a movie that looks really cool, but has like a very flimsy, poorly executed story? I'd much rather see the kind of like, I'd much rather watch a student film with a good story than watch some big budget, artistically impressive movie that has a bad story.
Because we talked before too, like style over substance.
Yeah.
And if you don't have if the substance isn't there, then like, why the hell am I watching this?
I'm like, what am I supposed to be getting out of this? Like,
but then even to analyze story, like what makes a good story, you know, because to really split hairs, you can, like, would you rather watch a movie that has really a strong emotional core, but the plot makes no sense? Or would you rather watch something that's like very plot driven, but doesn't really have an emotional connection? You know, I feel like there's like so much more refinement even within what a good story is itself.
Yes, agree on that front.
To summarize all this is, you know, filmmaking is really complicated.
It is.
And how anything gets done is shocking and beyond me.
And when something's really good on all levels, it is so impressive, because just to think about the number of people that had to touch it and then had to touch it in the way that makes it better, or at least as good as it was before, is awesome. And that's why I love film and TV, because it is truly a collaborative art form in a way that so much other art is really not. And so that's why I love it.
Yeah.
Long live the movies.
Because I was worried for a second. I thought you were going to shut it down.
No.
So filmmaking cannot be done alone, right? You can't have a movie without a screenwriter. You can't have a movie without a director. You can't have a movie without a cinematographer. You can't have a movie without an editor, you know? These are all the things that are able to help shape the movie and put it into theaters for people to view. You can't have a movie. I'd say you can't have a movie without an audience, right? You're making these for people to watch it, right?
Absolutely. Yes. I think the audience informs the film, blah, 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 blah.
So I wanted to quickly go through and talk about some of Tim Burton's collaborators. And I don't know if you had a chance to read much about Danny Elfman, but Danny Elfman has pretty much been, I'd say, to say something is Burton-esque
is to include Danny
and the work that he does in his score. And did he do he did a Nightmare on Elm Street. He's the singing voice of Jack.
You mean Nightmare Before Christmas?
What did I say?
Elm Street. Which I was like, no.
But like, is it a Nightmare on Elm Street, the musical?
Is there a musical?
No, but I'd watch that.
Let's start right in. I think he's only not worked on 3 Burton projects. I think one was Sweeney Todd, which makes sense because it's already got a bunch of music. And I think Sweeney Todd is something really cool where, aren't they singing live, kind of like Les Mis, but it's much more fun?
I don't think so.
Oh. But they are really
singing. Have vengeance. My sister, she always sings that with her friends. And then they went and saw Sweeney Todd with Josh Groban live. And Josh sings that line, and all of her friends turned because they didn't realize that she was singing from Sweeney Todd. And they were all able to realize that whole time. She's been doing this since Sweeney Todd, the movie, came out like in 2007.
They didn't know.
I love that movie.
I love that movie so much that my family knew to get me the soundtrack from the movie for Christmas.
My family got me the soundtrack for Christmas. And at first I was really irritated, annoyed, but then I loved it.
I was like a little bit embarrassed, but I was like, let me go upstairs and just listen to this on repeat. And then my family went also to see the Josh Groban musical without me. And I was just...
That seems to be a real theme. You have a problem with abandonment.
I don't know if I have a problem with abandonment. I've had a problem with how, let's go back in time to who loved Sweeney Todd? Me. And then who goes to see Sweeney Todd?
So you're the owner of Sweeney Todd.
No, but I feel like my family knows that I love Sweeney Todd. And they didn't invite me to come.
Did they not invite you, or they just...
Well, no, I just couldn't go. So it's okay.
It doesn't sound like it's okay.
I love Sweeney Todd.
You will have vengeance.
Watch out. Wait, which sister would do that?
Olivia.
That's why I laughed.
So, in addition to Danny Elfman, how many of Tim Burton's movies has Johnny Depp appeared in? This is a question for you.
I don't know how many, like 10?
Less.
6, 5, 7, 8.
Yes.
Okay, so there's Sweeney Todd, Dark Shadows. I don't know what else.
Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood, Sleepy Hollow, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Sweeney Todd, Alice in Wonderland, Dark Shadows, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children.
Interesting, because I feel like a couple of those titles, Dark Shadows, Sweeney Todd, even Edward Scissorhands, Willy Wonka, a lot of those feel kind of like he's playing a similar character. I mean, Sweeney Todd maybe not, because that's a very specifically dark role, but kind of that weird.
They're all outsiders. They're all different than the rest of the people in the movie. Is that what you're saying?
I suppose, but also a lot of wig work happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
But to say that Edward Scissorhands and Willy Wonka,
I would say that there is something similar about them.
I'd say rewatch Willy Wonka. Johnny Depp is doing an uncanny and frightening version of Michael Jackson, which I say he is not doing in Edward Scissorhands.
Willy Wonka is one of the few movies I almost walked out of. The new one.
The new one.
Yeah. I was
the new one, which was like 2006.
I was a teen when this happened.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
I would say what's similar about them is like they both have special talents and are kind of strange dudes.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. I'm just pointing it out. It's important to point out similarities and themes.
And another collaborator that I don't think that Tim Burton has worked with as often, but of course, have we even said the name aside from the synopsis? Winona Ryder. Winona Ryder.
Oh, I love Winona Ryder.
I want to do a bit of a deep dive.
On Winona?
Not necessarily on the movie she's been on, not necessarily
her personal life.
I was listening to the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast hosted by Josh Horowitz. Winona Ryder has appeared on the podcast 3 times.
Okay.
Most recently for Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting because it kind of tracks the rumors and mystery around the sequel being created because Winona first appeared on the podcast in 2015 for the movie The Experimenter.
Okay.
And on the podcast, Winona was talking to Josh, and I just like love the dynamic between Winona and Josh. Like Winona just seems to be really like, it was really funny because when Josh presented the podcast, he did a little intro before she came on, and he was like warning listeners. He's like, so Winona, she does this thing where she likes to talk really quietly, you know, really like she's talking directly to me. She kind of forgets that the mic is there. And sometimes she'll whisper and even go off mic. And so when I listen to it, like, it's funny that Josh pointed out, like, yeah, I noticed, but it didn't really distract that much. But Winona would do this thing where she'd be telling a story. She'd be like, yes, and I was 5 years old and she'd like be whispering like off like this, you know, she'd be off mic. But I think it was like really charming. But so Winona's recounting, she remembers when she was 5 years old, seeing Fantasia on the big screen. She got in trouble and her family got kicked out because she ran up to the screen because she literally wanted to be in the movie and jump onto the screen, which is what she would eventually do, starring some of the biggest movies of the 80s and the 90s.
That's so beautiful.
When Winona went to meet the director for Beetlejuice, she met a man whom she thought was from the art department. They chatted for a while and were getting along. And eventually Winona said, when will Tim Burton be arriving? The man clarified that he was Tim Burton. And Winona was astonished as he was so young. I think at that point she said that she'd only been in 2 movies previous to that. She was in Lucas and Square Dance, which I've never seen Lucas, but I saw Square Dance. And then Winona recounts making Bram Stoker's Dracula. And she said that she actually brought the script to Francis Ford Coppola as she was auditioning for another movie with him. And she initially thought that nothing would become of Dracula. And while the script was drastically changed, it was made. And then Winona recounts that she thought it was a bit campy when she watched it. And she said she hasn't seen, and this interview's in 2015, I should say, when she's doing this first interview, she's like, she hasn't seen it in decades. And she said that she also, the movie's also kind of ripped apart, especially for Keanu Reeves is supposed to have a British accent, but it's quite bad. And she says that she blames the dialect coach, who she said was from New Jersey, for why she and Keanu had bad English accents, which I thought was hilarious. But she's doing this all in such like a down to earth, funny way. And she's just is really charming. She feels so like regular, which is so weird to say because she's just seems larger than life.
90s. But this is reminding me to, have you seen any of the press she's done for Beetlejuice Beetlejuice?
Yes, which I think might be from Josh Horowitz.
Okay, I'll let you finish and then I'll tell you some other things I found.
Winona was also getting ready to shoot a new Netflix show when she was interviewing with Josh. And she expressed concerns about the Netflix and streaming way of having shows released all at once. And this show that she was about to film was obviously Stranger Things, which would kind of, so she was
the streaming show.
So she was in 2015, she's talking to Josh and she's like literally right about to have
a
renaissance. And maybe part of the reason why Beetlejuice is able to happen because her star power rose quite a bit again.
I think so. And then getting Jenna and Catherine involved.
And in this 2015 podcast, her and Josh are kind of talking about possible sequels to Beetlejuice and Heathers. And at least on the podcast, Winona seems to be very excited and positive about a Beetlejuice sequel, which kind of gives me a little more understanding of why some of the things that happened.
I mean, I have a lot of Oh, what do you mean? I have a lot of information about the development history of the sequel.
Well, so let me go through this. Will be the other 2 episodes are faster. Okay. So Winona appeared again on Happy, Sad, Confused on May 31st, 2022, this time with David Harper as they were joining Josh to discuss the premiere of season 4 of Stranger Things. So now, she's back.
She's back. She's big.
One aside that I thought was funny was David, the speech he gave, which I feel like you've talked about that on more than one occasion of Winona, like where she's like going like, and Winona was saying that at the time she didn't realize she was making all those expressions, but she says that she was doing it because like it was pretty unexpected that David would do this long speech that she was like was moving, but was kind of shocking to hear on the stage. And then David was also he's like, well, I was kind of like, I felt impassioned to do it, but I'm glad that you were making those reactions because it kind of grounded my, not like purpley prose, but just kind of being too
yeah, like together it made it something like a pop culture moment.
And so Winona was like, she was like, well, and then afterwards, like everyone was like commenting on it. She's like, I was becoming kind of self-conscious. And then David was reassuring her. And she's like, no, like I love that you did that. She's like, okay, good.
Oh my gosh, it's so cute.
And then this brings us, so we have Happy, Sad, Confused, October 12th, 2015 was episode 1. May 31st, 2022 was the second episode.
Okay.
And now September 6th, 2024 is the next time that Winona appeared.
Which is the day it premiered, Beetlejuice.
So she's there again with Josh to talk about Beetlejuice.
Oh, beautiful.
Winona explains that Josh is the one that got the rumor mill started about the Beetlejuice sequel.
Oh.
12 years ago, Josh met Tim Burton and heard about a possible sequel. And I bet Burton was just kind of like excited and chatting about it. And because Josh formed this relationship interviewing Winona Ryder, Josh told Winona, and that's when Winona Ryder appeared on Seth Meyers' show and announced that the Beetlejuice, the sequel was happening, which I find so hilarious that she's like, yeah, I guess this movie's happening.
Okay, I really like Winona Ryder. Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Though it did eventually happen, the announcement was very, very premature. Because I just remember being like, I think this was back in 2015, like when she does this first interview with Josh, is then Winona Ryder appears. I don't know if she was on there for Stranger Things in 2016, but she like goes on. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
She's like, I guess it's happening. And then like almost 10 years goes by and we don't hear. I was like, was that a fever dream? Like, I swear Winona Ryder announced a Beetlejuice sequel and it just took forever to happen.
A sequel to Beetlejuice. Can you confirm or deny this?
I think I can confirm it because Tim Burton did this it was very hush-hush, top secret. I don't know what might happen. I don't know. And then he was doing some press for Big Eyes, and he did an on-camera interview, and he said, oh, yeah, we're doing it, and Winona's going to be in it.
That's very exciting.
And I was like...
Very exciting news.
So can I say that? I mean, if he said it, I can...
If he said it, then you can't... that's just... It's on the record.
Okay. I mean, there's a little bit... It is in here in my notes about the Seth Meyers. I didn't know about that, but there is a little bit more to it than that in the background.
Okay. Winona tells Josh she had also wanted her character Lydia to end up with Beetlejuice. I think I told you remember I told you that I was like Winona was on this one interview and she says that she secretly wished Lydia and Beetlejuice ended up together.
I actually thought it was going to happen.
Winona said that the first movie of Beetlejuice felt like an indie movie since there was limited studio interference while filming. She also felt like she got to have input thanks to Tim Burton really like kind of bring her in.
Which is awesome.
Winona talks about auditioning for the Hoodsucker Proxy, a role that ended up going to Jennifer Jason Leigh. But it's funny how Winona describes it. She says that she had to leave the set of Age of Innocence, the Martin Scorsese movie, and took a cab to this callback for Hoodsucker Proxy. She was in her full wardrobe that included this really tight corset because she was running late. She just had to rush over there. And she said that she had to quickly change everything once she got to the set. And then she said that she absolutely bombed the audition and didn't get the part. Aww. And she said that while she was devastated she didn't get it, that she ended up sending flowers to Jennifer and being like, you deserve the part. So again, it was really sweet in Winona fashion. And then Josh also asks Winona about filming the Edward Scissorhands commercial that came out a few years ago. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
For the Super Bowl. She says that a few years back she saw Timothy Chalamet. Oh, okay, so I should also say that the Edward Scissorhands commercial has Timothy Chalamet playing Edward Scissorhands, well, the child of Edward Scissorhands, which Winona also had a funny side. She's like, I think about these things. She's like, how did I have a child with Edward Scissorhands? She's like, these are the thoughts that I have. But anyway, they have a son together, and she says that she remembers seeing Timothy Chalamet in Homeland before he became like one of the first things he appeared in. And she actually wrote down his name because he stood out to her.
She said the same thing about Jenna Ortega, that she saw her.
Oh, Jenna Ortega? Well, you'll appreciate this. She also says that she saw Sadie Sink on The Americans and wrote down her name also.
I just watched that episode. I'm rewatching The Americans.
Did you write down Sadie Sink's name?
Well, no, I already.
I guess you already knew. I was like, she already came.
Like, she went somewhere. Wow. So she must do that. That's kind of cool that she does that. Has a little list of.
And then I think this ties in nicely too with the idea of Beetlejuice kind of, Jenna Ortega is brought on to be the modern day version of Lydia to a degree.
Yes.
And while there's a lot of similarities to them, I think that Jenna is quite different than Lydia's character in a way, would you say?
I mean, in terms of their belief system, absolutely. I mean, in terms of their contrarian nature, not really.
Similar,
yeah, but I think that's a nice how we can be the same as our parents, but different.
So now we're up to the minute on this podcast, and Winona was talking about the modern day and just the strangeness of creating content. Like the word content, which is strange. I mean, that's what we're doing right now, is creating content. And when she was saying that's just so weird creating content, and then Josh on the podcast, he's like, well, that's what we're doing too right now, is we're creating content. She's like, just the word though, I don't like it, which it is kind of a strange, it just makes it feel so empty and hollow when you say content.
Yeah.
It just feels like you're just making
stuff to make it.
Making stuff to make it.
I don't really ever really think of, I mean, yes, we're creating content, of course, but I don't really think of it that way.
Because it just feels so...
I'm just talking about movies that I love. I'm talking about an art form that I love.
And then
I'm with Winona.
She also, on the same like vein of talking about, the word content, she was like, and the kids, that's what they say also. I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. At first she said that. She's like, I'm messing with you. She's like, and that's actually like a positive thing. And then Josh's like, oh, okay. But that's not, she was actually like censoring herself, because I was a little confused. Like, I'm messing with I'm messing with you is kind of like jokey. But then she goes on to say, in the first episode where Josh was mentioning how Winona goes off mic, she goes off mic on this, and she's like, well, they weren't saying I'm messing with you. She says, I fuck with you. I fuck with you. And she's like, at first, people would say that to me. All the kids were saying that to me. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry. And then she's like, and then the kids explained to me that actually, when you're fucking with someone, it's a good thing. I fuck with you. It's good. I thought again. Like, she just is so...
She's really endearing. And on this press... It's funny that you kind of came at it via these podcast episodes, whereas I saw a bunch of interview clips with her, Catherine O'Hara, and Jenna Ortega on the interview circuit, and just all of these like really endearing moments. Like, apparently they were, I think, at the Venice Film Festival, and they were maybe on a boat, or they were somewhere outside, and Winona's wearing these really big sunglasses. Did you hear about this? These really, really big sunglasses. And all of the paparazzi are yelling at her, take off your sunglasses. And then she's like, oh. And then Jenna, you can be seen, you kind of can read her lips. She's like, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. And she's like, okay. So then they're in this interview room later on. And the interviewer goes, Jenna, that moment where you told Winona that she could keep her sunglasses on, that was really powerful. And Jenna's like, huh? Like, what? Oh. And then Winona's like, oh, I heard about this. She's like, we kind of went viral. And she's like, I've never gone viral before. And it's like, what do you mean you're Winona Ryder? Like, what do you mean you've never gone viral
I know,
before? We were just talking about the David Harbour video clip, and it was so cute. Yeah. And then Jenna's like, oh, it's really not a big deal. Like, she would have done the same for me. And Winona like gets really serious. She's like, well, yes. I mean, they've been saying that to you. Of course. I would have said, you keep this on. It's just really sweet.
Yeah. And I just think it speaks to, we talked a little bit about how Jenna Ortega's character and Winona Ryder's characters are both different, but the same in a way in the movie, which can kind of speak to a mother-daughter relationship. There's similarities and contrasts, but it also kind of speaks to a deeper level to the Hollywood experience that Winona Ryder had in the 80s and 90s, I'm sure is much different than the experience that Jenna Ortega is having in the late 2010s, early 2020s. And I mean, there's
there's like
positives and negatives to it. The negatives to, I feel, Jenna's experience is that I feel like films and movies are becoming much less of the cultural relevance and don't have as much influence as in the time that Winona Ryder was growing up in it. But then I think at the time that Winona Ryder was growing up in it, I think that a lot of actors, and I'm sure women actors, female actors, had a lot less agency and control over their careers. And so again, it's like the controlling nature of the paparazzi is what Winona Ryder grew up on. I never see her as like a paparazzi girl though. I feel like that's like more of a early 2000s experience, but I think just like you have to, agree.
Yeah.
So you're not perceived a certain way. Whereas like Jenna Ortega is much more taking the power back is what it felt like.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I would say that they occupy they have a similar vibe to them. Like, okay, Winona was this kind of like dark haired goth kind of girl in a lot of films. And I feel like Jenna, she plays Wednesday Addams. She's in Scream. Like there's a similar vibe to them. I do think you're right that it sounds like Jenna probably can have more agency, but to combat that a little bit, last or 2 years ago or whenever Wednesday kind of came out, she was quoted in some article saying how she really understood her character so much so that when she was on set, there would be certain lines in the script and she would be kind of like, Wednesday would not say that. She's like, and I was just rewriting it right on set. And she was just, honestly, I believe that probably was happening, but she was being very, it was obviously taken out of context, the quote, but it was very confident, I knew what I was talking about and they didn't kind of a vibe. And I'm sure the whole quote doesn't read that way, but and then she kind of got a lot of flack for it. And I would say kind of disappeared. Like, I don't know if you've heard a lot about her since that happened. I think she kind of probably was advised to kind of step back from a PR perspective so that and then recently when this movie was coming out, she was back in the press saying something like, I didn't know how like my words could get misconstrued. I didn't, they were taken out of context. So I think that there maybe is more of an opportunity to collaborate, but at the same time, you still can be so harshly judged by being a woman, a young girl with opinions, a young girl who's confident in what she can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I feel like there's something similar and that's maybe what's kind of bonded them. And I don't know, in all the interviews I saw, it's like very sweet, like very in awe of and very maternal toward Jenna Ortega. And I think that's really sweet. And there was some quote where she was saying how Jenna referenced some movie, a classic movie. And Winona got really excited, like, oh, you love film? And Jenna was like, of course. And she's like, some of my other co-stars, I love them, but these young people, they just don't watch movies. And everybody on the internet was like, ooh, she's kind of shading the Stranger Things kids, which probably isn't true. But
I think people are saying that single-handedly that she's shading Millie Bobby Brown.
Yeah, which is awful. Which is awful. Which but listening
to all these interviews of Winona Ryder, there's no way
she's not.
She has a mean bone in her body.
Yeah.
In fact, she even talks about how like she's the kind of person, I forget how she described herself, but I wish I could remember the words. But basically when she like meets someone and they're like getting along, I think she's talking to a degree about working with other actors, especially in the 90s when she was much younger. And other actors could be quite moody and maybe change their attitude throughout, if not the day, if not throughout by the hour or throughout the day. So she'd be like, yeah, I'd interact with one actor and I thought we were friends, I thought we were close. And the next day I'd come and it didn't really seem like we were friends. So just the way she sees herself too, just cracks me up. She just is so, and again, like what you're saying about how she, like, this is the first time I've gone viral. Like she just doesn't,
what do you mean?
It's like, you're Winona Ryder.
Well, so
you're Winona Ryder. What do you mean you're confused that you went viral on the internet? You have been in Beetlejuice. You've been in Edward Scissorhands, Mr. Deeds. I don't know why that movie comes to mind.
Well,
Reality Bites.
Don't forget Girl Interrupted.
Oh, Girl Interrupted.
My favorite. But also my other one last Winona story that I have to tell. Another interview clip that I find so charming. She's being interviewed with David Harbour, probably for one of the Stranger Things seasons. And she's talking about, she's like, back in the 80s and 90s, like, I didn't really have the look. Like, I wasn't really pretty. And she was like talking, and then David Harbour's like in the corner, and he's like, he's just like, what do you mean? Like, he's like, his face reads like, you were fucking hot. I don't understand. And then she's going on like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of weird. And like, it's just like, oh, it's so sweet.
Yeah,
Why?
It is sweet. Why? She was talking about an audition that she had with Jeff Bridges.
Yeah.
And they were doing a audition scene together. And in the script, at the end of the scene, they were supposed to kiss. She's like, oh my gosh, like Jeff Jeff Bridges is going to kiss me. And then it gets to the end of the scene and she's like, and I was so disappointed. Jeff Bridges leaned in and kissed my forehead. And then he's like, I can't kiss you. You're near the same age as my daughter.
Aww. That's so sweet.
This probably happens with a lot of celebrities. It's like there's like the celebrity self and then there's like who
Your
you
real
actually
self.
are. And it's or like the public perception of who you are and how you actually see yourself. There's something there. But in these interviews, like, yeah, Winona just seems to be so like down to earth. She's even in
normal
the
person.
Yeah, she was in the Criterion closet was another thing that she was in. And she's like has her like bag with her and she's like whispering like, I love this movie. And she like puts it in her bag. It just was really satisfying to watch.
And I will just say quickly, I don't think we should go into it in great detail. Maybe we can another day if we do another Winona movie. But I was reading about her upbringing. It's really interesting. Like
She talked a bit about it. I think in the first episode.
They lived.
She was like,
in a
I grew up in
commune.
but she says, she's like, yes, you know, I grew up in a commune. My mom, you know, was a projectionist. That was not her main job though, but that's kind of what got Winona into movies is her mom would get film and like project them. But I think she did something else similar to that.
Both her parents were editors,
Yeah.
I think. And
she's like, yes, I lived in a commune. She's like, no, it wasn't a cult. I know when people say communes, it sounds like cults. It was not a cult. So that was really interesting. Yeah.
But it was also crazy. Like they were listing some of her like godparents or family friends. I think Allen Ginsberg was one of them. Like people like, and her godmother is the wife of Aldous Huxley, who wrote A Brave New World. I was like, what the hell? Like, oh my God, what an incredible cast of characters to grow up around. And so another time, maybe we could do Girl Interrupted because I love that movie and we could dive more into who Winona and Angelina and Brittany Murphy and Elizabeth Moss and all the great ladies who are in Girl Interrupted, who they are.
Whoopi Goldberg.
Oh yeah. I was like, wait, you're right.
So you want to talk a bit about the
Development history. Right away after the success of Beetlejuice, 2 sequel scripts were commissioned in 1990. And one, let's see, it was like a priority for Warner Brothers and maybe for Tim, but then, you know, Batman and all that kind of got in the way.
One was called Beetlejuice in Love.
Yes.
Was one of them. But then the one that I knew about was called Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian.
Yes.
And just for the title alone, I love that concept. And when you say Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, like I immediately, like, if only it had been made in the 90s, I think it would have just been such an interesting movie to make.
And the plot sounded really cool.
Where
it would be like the Deets decide to move to Hawaii, but then they accidentally move onto the site where there's like a Hawaiian ghost or something like that, which could have been handled very poorly.
Yeah.
Probably would have been in the 90s, but could also be handled very well. And then Beetlejuice is sort of summoned. But go ahead, what were you going to say?
Yeah. So the concept for that was developed in the early 90s, where Beetlejuice goes on a wild adventure in Hawaii. And then it didn't come to fruition for multiple reasons, it seems.
I think I read that Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian was still owned for a long time by Geffen Studios or whatever the original production company was.
But Geffen Studios, their logo is on this movie.
Well, it's not Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, is it?
No.
Because it's also Plan B, Brad Pitt's company is involved too. But one thing interesting to kind of complicate, as charming as the story is, that Josh from, what's the podcast called?
Happy, Sad, Confused.
Happy, Sad, Confused. I did find information that as early as 2011, Warner Brothers hired Seth Grahame-Smith, who was the collaborator of Burton on Dark Shadows and Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, to write and produce a sequel to Beetlejuice. He said, okay, I'll do it if the story, this is Graham Smith, a story that is worthy of actually doing this for real, something that is not just about cashing in, is not just about forcing a remake or a reboot down someone's throat. And he was also very adamant that Keaton would return, but Burton and Keaton had not officially signed on, but they said if the script was good enough, they would come back. In February 2012, Graham Smith met with Keaton. We talked for a couple of hours and talked about big picture stuff. It's a priority for Warner Brothers. It's a priority for Tim. Michael's been wanting to do it for 20 years, and he'll talk to any about it who will listen. And then in 2013, that's when Ryder did hint there was a possible sequel. Maybe this is what she said on Seth Meyers. I'm kind of sworn to secrecy, but it sounds like it might be happening. It's 27 years later, and I have to say, I love Lydia Deetz so much. She was such a huge part of me. I would really be interested in what she is doing 27 years later. But she confirmed she would only do it if Burton and Keaton were involved. Then in 2014, Burton stated, it's a character that I love and I miss actually working with Michael. There's only one Beetlejuice. We're working on a script, and I think it's probably closer than ever, and I'd love to work with him again. 2015, Graham Smith told Entertainment Weekly the script was finished and that he and Burton intend to start working on it by the end of the year, and that Keaton and Ryder would return in their respective roles. Then in 2015, that's when she goes on Seth Meyers, and she confirmed, Winona Ryder confirmed she would be reprising her role. And then Burton says in 2016, it's something that I would really like to do in the right circumstances, but it's one of those films where it has to be right. It's not a kind of movie that cries out for a sequel. It's not the Beetlejuice trilogy. So it's something that if the elements are right, because I do love the character, and Michael's amazing as the character, so yeah, we'll see. But there's nothing concrete yet. And then in 2017, they hired another scriptwriter. And then in 2019, Warner Brothers said the sequel has been shelved. So there was this whole lead up, and then it went away again. As we know, it did finally come to be. But I find that to be very, very interesting. And I do think maybe Brad Pitt's studio plan B, they came on board in 2022, and that's probably what kicked it back off again.
We talked about it, though. It's so interesting that Winona Ryder and Michael Keaton, both the stars of the original Beetlejuice and the stars of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, were able to maintain, or at least with Winona Ryder, have a bit of a return to modern audiences with Stranger Things.
What about Michael Keaton?
Michael Keaton, absolutely too. But I feel like he's been more. I feel like he's been more consistently making movies than Winona Ryder has.
Yeah, I agree. I would say he's still like a household. He's never. Did he ever really fade?
I'd say so. I feel like Birdman was
His comeback,
which is already 10 years ago now. Yeah, and we could do a whole in-depth conversation on Michael Keaton and his long career too. I mean, his career spans longer than Winona Ryder's. I mean, maybe even longer than Catherine O'Hara, which brings me up. Isn't it interesting too that Catherine O'Hara, she's an amazing actor, but how easily, like, yes, she starred in Beetlejuice. Yes, she starred in Home Alone, but how she could have just been like a lost icon of the 90s, but was able to maintain star power with Schitt's Creek.
Totally.
And then
and resonate so much with such a young people love her because of that show.
Yeah. Which I feel like we were watching the Beetlejuice original movie, and every now and then you'd be like, oh, she's doing Moira's coming out. And it still seems like different, but then when we were watching Beetlejuice,
you saw it.
When she was trying, I don't know what she was trying to do. She was trying to summon her dead husband's spirit or whatever. That was full on Moira. That was like undeniable Moira. And I was like, okay.
I mean, it's really just Catherine is what it is.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And I find it awesome. It's hilarious.
But there's like this scene earlier where in the first movie when Delia, is that her name? Goes like, I will go insane and I will bring you with me. Like that was like more early, like that was even like Home Alone vibes. Like, Kevin, you know, like that, like the screaming stuff. But like the Moira is definitely like
it's like the like kind of like goofy
and the strange pronunciation of words
and the like head tilt. I don't know.
The head tilt.
Did you notice a Schitt's Creek reference?
No.
When you're in her art studio and you're seeing some of her art, there's this image of her. She's doing a lot of self-portraits or like.
Oh, the birds.
The birds.
Yes.
And that made
when
me
she has her
happy.
Hollywood career in Schitt's Creek. And then also one of my favorite scenes of this movie is when her husband gets buried and they're at the funeral. Then the priest launches into this long story trying to give her comfort about where her husband's spirit is.
Speaking very like Catholic, like scripture.
And then it immediately cuts to Delia and she's like, what?
My favorite thing that she did though. So Lydia agrees to get married to Justin Theroux, I don't really know his name, on Halloween night. And then she's kind of realizing Beetlejuice is still around and she's freaking out about it. And I forget. She's like, we have to leave. We need to leave this town immediately. I'm taking you back to school, Astrid. Like, this is all done. And then Catherine O'Hara goes, oh, does this mean the wedding is off? Like all contrite. But then she turns around to Jenna and she goes, like, she's so thrilled that they're not going to get married. And I thought that was really funny. And she did that a couple more times as well.
And then there was a really funny scene where we hear a screaming noise and Justin Theroux character is like running back to the house because he hears screaming. He thinks that it's Winona. And then it cuts to Catherine O'Hara is sitting in front of a camera just like screaming and taking pictures.
Portraits of grief.
And she's trying to take portraits of grief. So she needs to get the perfect scream. And it was hilarious. It was really funny.
I also liked when Winona / Lydia were doing the breathing exercises and Catherine O'Hara said, what'd she say?
You sound like a moose in heat or something like that.
But I thought it was really lovely that they still didn't get along or see eye to eye, but they both had come to care about one another and like respect one another. And they still kind of made a joke where Lydia's like, well, that's because I sold out, became rich and famous. She's like, no, I liked you before that. But so it's still a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing, but also felt real and earned. And there's something about waiting so long to do a sequel and getting to see that all these people either found stardom again or never lost it, or their artistry persisted. And it's really delightful to come back to it that much longer.
Well, that specific scene that you were talking about too, it was really interesting. And I had said I was a little confused about Delia in the original Beetlejuice because I didn't connect that it was Lydia's stepmom. I don't even know if when I was a kid I understood what a stepmom was. I was very sheltered, so I didn't really understand the concept of a stepmom. But she also doesn't really seem to take, in the first Beetlejuice, she doesn't really seem to have the stereotypes of a traditional evil stepmother. Like, yes, she's
more
vain and
indifferent toward Lydia.
She's indifferent toward Lydia. And I didn't really quite see the humor in her when I was younger, but now she's one of my favorite elements of the movie.
I agree.
And so it's really interesting in this Beetlejuice is she's on the porch and Lydia comes out and they're having a conversation about Astrid and kind of like, you see like Moira's kind of like almost, it's like the closest point of connection that she has to Lydia.
You called her Moira.
Did I really?
Delia.
They're one and the same. They're one and the same. Delia is making a point of connection with Lydia. I think the strongest point in the movie is where it's like, it's like the idea of motherhood. Like,
and the three generations. It's like Gilmore Girls. But I really loved that scene because one, it was like they're on the same side now and that was clear. And you can kind of see the gap of the 27 years and think about how that came to be. And that's really moving to me. But then also, Lydia's like saying, I don't know, Astrid hates me. I don't know how to connect with her. And Moira's, I just did it too. Delia's like, that's what teenagers do. Remember how terrible you were to me? Lydia's like, no, it's not like that. But she's kind of coming around to like, okay, maybe you're right. And I don't remember quite the lead up to this line, but then Lydia's talking about Beetlejuice and being afraid again and how she didn't think she was still traumatized by this, but it's still haunting her. And it's all funny and silly, but also it's like there's a dark undercurrent of truth to all of this that makes it all work for me. And then Delia says to her, come on now, go find that goth teenager who tormented me. You've lost her and you need to find her again. And that was really a powerful line, even though I don't think the movie quite let Lydia or Winona go on that journey. The idea of the journey was really beautiful to me. Yeah.
Which I remember that for the end of this podcast. The idea of the journey, I think, is a very good sentiment for Beetlejuice.
I guess since we were talking about the sequel, I thought it might be a good time to say, do we think there'll be a threequel? Beetlejuice. You
just summoned Beetlejuice.
I'm waiting.
So I hope there is not.
This is what Burton said when asked. Let's do the math. It took 35 years to do this, so I'll be over 100. But I guess it's possible with the advent of science these days. But I don't think so.
I like that answer.
I quite liked that answer as well. I don't know. I feel like maybe I don't want there to be a sequel, but I do think that the ending, I could see an interesting story being told with Jenna Ortega's character.
I said this last night. Free Jenna Ortega from taking on all these nostalgia roles. We're coming close to wrapping this up, right? Because I don't feel like we need to go so deep into the plot. I guess we didn't really talk about much of Willem Dafoe or Monica Bellucci, but I
feel like those were the weaker elements. They were fun, but they were kind of weak. I guess are there any other scenes or moments you loved? I don't know.
There's the character Bob, who's one of the Shrunken Head characters, who's kind of like Beetlejuice's silent right-hand man.
Well, he was forced into being the right-hand man. He had to be dressed like him because Beetlejuice needed a cover because his ex-wife is coming to murder him. And you just tell on Bob's face he doesn't want to do it, but
he has no choice. And then also he's like, when Beetlejuice is able to get back into the real world, Bob is assigned to prevent all the other minions from
and he's standing
leaving.
In the hole.
And everyone just immediately pushes past him. And I loved that too, of all of the Shrunken Head people running around the town.
The real town, I agree.
And almost kind of, I don't know what about it. I guess it's because they were all wearing suits. Kind of reminded me of Pee Wee Herman, which that actor's passed away recently too. It's a spoiler, but Bob gets killed.
He does.
And then they have a joke in the end credits where it says R.I.P. Bob. But I was so disappointed that he was killed.
I felt for him.
It was really sad.
I think we could all relate to him because he's someone his boss is telling him what to do. He doesn't want to do it. He's scared, but he's just got to put up with it. And you're like, I've been Bob.
Yeah.
It's sad.
What about Bob? As we're approaching wrapping up this episode, one thing that immediately struck me because it's the beginning of the movie is the movie kicks off with Donna Summer's version of MacArthur's Park, which became a disco popular song in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like really interesting and surprising and kind of came out of left field just because it feels so different from what I thought the original Beetlejuice soundtrack was like to include this song. And I was really confused by it. And one of the best scenes of the movie, you and I were talking about, one of our favorite scenes of like most visually effective, but not emotionally effective, is it all comes to a climax where all these different stories we were talking about all come together because Winona's character Lydia has agreed to marry Beetlejuice to get her daughter out of the afterlife.
Yes.
Justin Theroux is supposed to marry Winona Ryder on Halloween.
So the priest is already there.
They're already there at the chapel. Winona and Jenna conveniently come out of the afterlife, ride to a cemetery where the chapel is, where the wedding's already starting. Winona sprints over to get married. And as she's about to walk down the aisle, Beetlejuice appears and says, "You agreed to marry me." While this is all happening, they break out into a cover, or the original version, Richard Harris's version, who we found out is the original
Dumbledore.
His version of MacArthur's Park, where everyone in the chapel breaks out into lip syncing, much like the song Deo in the original Beetlejuice, where they are like hypnotized and unwillingly are doing lip sync karaoke dance moves to this. A giant wedding cake appears where green icing pours from the sky as MacArthur Park is playing, and then a rain cloud appears that's raining above the cake as all the side characters are dancing around the cake, and then they become frozen.
Yeah.
Winona Ryder is being forced down the aisle in her red dress to Beetlejuice to get married. As it's happening, Willem Dafoe appears with all his police investigators. They break through the windows. Beetlejuice freezes them. Then Monica Bellucci bursts through the door, and then Beetlejuice is able to use Justin Theroux, who has been revealed to actually truly be a jerk.
Who only wanted to marry Lydia for money, and because she was codependent, he posed at a grief group to find weak women.
Jenna somehow gets unfrozen. She's able to draw a new door in the ground where one of those animation snakes comes out and swallows both Monica Bellucci and Justin Theroux.
Yeah.
Thus solving that problem. And then Jenna, having read the recently deceased book, realizes that Beetlejuice broke some laws to bring Winona Ryder into the afterlife so that the contract that she signed is null and void. And then Winona says Beetlejuice's name 3 times. He blows up into an air balloon and then pops. Again, like what I was talking about at the beginning of the movie starts out with Donna Summer's version of MacArthur's Park. And then in this wedding scene, they're lip syncing to Richard Harris's MacArthur's Park.
Which is more
melancholy. And then you have the literal cake with the green icing pouring over it, which the lyrics of MacArthur's Park are, "MacArthur's Park is melting in the dark, all the sweet green icing flowing down. Someone left the cake out in the rain. I don't think I can take it because it took so long to bake it, and I'll never have that recipe again."
Aww.
I feel like there's a lot of depth in those lyrics, and I feel like there's a reason why it's included in this movie. But before I get into that, Tim Burton pulls a lot from his like youth, and we didn't really talk about too much that he always felt like an outsider. In fact, I have a quote from him saying, this is from a Medium article: "If you've ever had that feeling of loneliness, of being an outsider, it never quite leaves you. You can be happy or successful or whatever, but that thing still stays within you." So that's really interesting. We were like talking about characters that Johnny Depp plays. I'd imagine is kind of a version of Tim Burton one way or another, of this like lonely outsider, even if they seem to have it all like Willy Wonka and the Charlie Factory. There's something broken, their childhood self. There's like something broken within them. Connecting Tim Burton to nostalgia and how that kind of fuels his movies, especially his earlier works. And Tim Burton pulls so much of the creator world and it's anchored so much to his past, like his personal past.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that Beetlejuice is different in a way because it's almost anchored in the nostalgia of Beetlejuice, which is the nostalgia of his past. You know what I'm saying? Like it's almost more, I feel like this movie is exploring more of the idea of making a sequel than it is to his like personal connection of being a lonely outsider.
I think I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, I mean, even the fact that twice Beetlejuice, when Lydia and Justin go into the underworld because Justin stupidly says his name 3 times, he does some kind of magic spell on Lydia and she immediately gets pregnant and births like a creepy Beetlejuice child. And then at the end of the movie, they're doing this like flash forward of what seeming to set up a possible idea of a threequel with when Lydia and her daughter going on the European trip that Astrid always imagined going on with her father. And then they're at the Dracula's castle, which is a movie that Winona appeared in. And then they're looking at this like cute boy and they kind of flash forward and Astrid's getting married to this boy. And it's like very sweet and nostalgic, like, oh, this is what happens in life continues and blah, blah, blah. And then they're giving birth and and Lydia's watching her daughter give birth through the glass and it's kind of odd and hilarious. And then, it's kind of like the one off note in this like kind of beautiful sequence. And then Astrid gives birth to the creepy Beetlejuice baby.
Yeah.
And then the Beetlejuice baby like wreaks havoc. And then she smiles at the baby. And that's like, and then Lydia has a dream. It's all a dream, but is it a dream? Because Beetlejuice is in bed with her, and then she has another dream. And so all of this to say is I think you're kind of right. It is about like,
in that ending alone there, I feel like you just present, like, to say this movie is overstuffed, I think while people are always saying it's a critique, I think it was actually very intentional of Tim Burton to make it overstuffed. Because of that ending that you described alone, that is like, that could be 3 different Beetlejuice storylines. And so I do think that there's something going on where there's this pressure to make a sequel, and not only make a sequel, but that is both commercially, creatively successful, which is like, and critically successful, and how much like pressure and how impossible that is, which is why I think MacArthur Park, that song, is so critical and literally tied to this, is because this song MacArthur's Park is a very strange song. And it's this song about, I mean, first Richard Harris is recounting it, then Donna Summers is recounting it, but it's this idea that I assume this couple is meeting at a park and they have a cake with green icing and it rains and it destroys the cake.
do you know
But they're having like it's like nostalgia for this event. Is
the
there
origin
symbolism?
of the song is that Richard Harris, he used to go to this park in Los Angeles with
MacArthur's Park.
Yeah, with his girlfriend at the time, or maybe it was a longer term lover, I don't know. And he would see all these things happening and then he would feel nostalgia for it.
Yes.
So it is literally about what you just described. And I agree. I feel like even the idea that the movie kind of ends with Astrid having a baby version of Beetlejuice, that's like a weird demonic version of Beetlejuice, even more insane, almost like a Chucky doll version. I think that's like giving birth sequels.
Yes.
A perversion of the original.
This is all a perversion of the need for sequels and franchises. This movie's overstuffed. Like, Willem Dafoe and Monica Bellucci's storyline is its own Beetlejuice movie, where there's a detective who used to be an actor in the real world, and there's a corpse bride sucking the life out of afterlife people. That's its own movie. The storyline of Winona Ryder being a mother to Jenna Ortega and the dynamic between Delia, Lydia, and Astrid, I feel like it's its own movie too.
There's even a romance movie with the ghosts.
Exactly. Even there's a sequel within this like sequel idea.
But
so
there's
it's
all
like
these little movies.
And so I feel it's like he like intentionally like overstuffed this. Like, okay, you want me to make a sequel? I'm gonna give you 10 different Beetlejuice movies in this sequel. So then you can't force me to make a third movie because I can say I've already done it. I feel like it was very intentional. And even that quote that you read to me where he said that he'll be like 100 by the time the next third will be made if they're doing it in order of how long it takes between sequels. He's like, yeah, I'll be dead. If you could bring me back to life, then I'll come back for a third.
Okay, so I'm really curious. I agree, but at the same time, I believe it's on track to have a gigantic opening weekend. And I'm curious if that, I mean, people can say what they're going to say.
I wonder if he like didn't anticipate that.
But money talks.
Money does talk. I just would... I think that it is creatively wrong to make a third version.
I don't know.
But
I don't know.
Beetlejuice, the character himself, is inherently wrong. So
Exactly.
maybe it's right.
I do think like the reason this movie works so well for me is that they did wait, and I don't think they'll make a third one. And I don't think that they should.
I hope they don't.
But I'm never opposed.
Never.
Pretty much never, unless it's like a gigantic franchise that like I just don't like. Like I don't really want to watch a superhero movie really, but otherwise I kind of think if it was successful and fun and people like doing it and they want to do it and if they can get a new angle on it, I don't really have a problem as long as people are still making original art too. And that's really, you don't want to encroach upon original art, but I don't really like when people say there should never be any more sequels ever again. That makes me sad. Like it's exciting when there's a Mamma Mia too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I think there's something about it that is nice.
But it'd be nice if we didn't have to have so much IP connection to get a movie made.
Agreed. I totally agree. Absolutely.
And so I feel like to keep the artistic integrity, I don't want to see Beetlejuice 3.
Why don't we just say this? That we have a wish to make. And my wish is for a third sequel. Beetlejuice. And your wish is that there is never another Beetlejuice ever again.
Well, if we want to make a wish, we need a cake.
We do need a cake.
One perhaps that is melting in the rain.
What are you saying? And I am acting shocked, but Joe did show me the cake earlier, so I am aware. But I was really shocked. I was like, what? Oh my.
I'm Joe.
I'm Allison.
And this is Queer Cinema Catchup, a podcast where we talk about movies, TV, and miscellaneous topics through a queer lens. Subscribe, like, comment what you thought about Beetlejuice.
Email us at queercinemacatchup@gmail.com. So I've made my wish.
I've made mine.